but Shalom. I'm back, continuing to teach 2 Samuel. We've arrived to chapter 19. We're getting close to the end of 2 Samuel. And I've mentioned this earlier before. My name is Joseph Shulam. I am the retired director of Netivyah Bible Instruction Ministry. And we've arrived to chapter 19. Chapter 18 was the death of Absalom, the son of David, and David's deep mourning over Absalom, his son, wishing that he died in his place, in the place of Absalom. Even though Absalom was a rebellious son, he tried to take over the kingdom from David. He was abusive to both to his father and to the community by his manipulative actions. And David still loved him so much that he was willing to die in his place than for Absalom to die. We arrived to chapter 19. All these chapters, from the time of David's marriage of Bathsheba till now, essentially God is not mentioned and He's not in the picture. I'm repeating this because this is a key issue in trying to understand what is really going on here. And I've said it earlier in my teaching, my interest in studying the Bible in general, but specifically the historical books, is to try to understand how God works and the characters of the people that are the main actors of this narrative. And of course, why does God love David so much when David is, as the British would say, a bit of a rascal? Yes, he's a bit of a rascal, but God loves him. And we're going to see this in the next chapter, chapter 19. But just to recap a little bit of chapter 18, David has to flee from Jerusalem and go on the other side of the Jordan to the city of Mahanaim. It's an old place where King Saul was famous because he saved the people of Mahanaim and from their enemies who belittled them and abused them. And running away from Jerusalem, there are people who are on his side, some of his advisors, and there is people that were his friends that turned against him and cursed him on the way, and David did nothing about it. Sad chapter 18. Chapter 19 is not much better. So David is mourning for Absalom in chapter 18. He's mourning for Absalom, and Joab, who is the chief of staff, the head general, David's faithful servant for years and years and years, but faithful but bloody also. He killed Abner ben Ner where he shouldn't have killed. He killed another one of David's ex-advisors and friends that turned against him without David's permission, and finally he killed Absalom, David's son and the heir to the throne. So Joab gets the news. Behold, David is weeping and mourning for Absalom publicly. So the victory over Absalom that Joab essentially produced, the text says in verse 2, so the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people, because David was mourning for his son. For the people heard, it is said that day, the king is grieved for his son. And the people stole back into the city that day, as people who are ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. In other words, all the joy of the victory over Absalom and his rebellion against his father David turns into a day of mourning, of grieving by the king and by the people when they see their king, beloved King David, mourning and weeping for his son. And so they came back into the city across the Jordan, sad, weeping with the king. The people were ashamed. Ashamed for two reasons. One is that the king is not grateful for the victory that these people did to restore him back on his throne in Jerusalem. He ran away from the battle with his son and with his son's people, and these people ran away with him. They endangered their lives, they endangered their position, and now that the victory is his, King David, because his son Absalom was killed by Joab, they have to sneak into the city quietly without celebration. But the king covered his face, and the king cried out with his loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Verse 5 of chapter 19. Then Joab came into the house of the king and said, "Today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemies and hate your friends." What an accusation. You love your enemies, Absalom and all of his gang, and you hate your friends, which is Joab and his army and his soldiers and his advisors and the people that ran away from Jerusalem with David into the wilderness and into the Transjordan. Absalom is getting bold against King David, which is David is still the king. It's not such a simple thing, folks. David is not such a forgiving character. He has a good memory. Even though he's old, he has a good memory for those who are his friend and for those who are betraying him or taking a different position than his, even though they may be strategically right. But as far as David is concerned, no, they're not right. So Joab comes to the house of the king and says, "You have disgraced all your servants. You have taken the side of your enemy, and you have disgraced your servants who have stood by you faithfully, ran away from Jerusalem, abandoned their houses and their families, and went to the Transjordan, and you love your enemies and hate your friends." And Joab continues, "For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, then you would have been pleased. You would have liked it if all of us had died and Absalom had lived." And then Absalom commands the king, "Now therefore arise, go out and speak comfort to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, not one will stay with you this night." In other words, all your servants, your generals, your officers, your administrators, your advisors, everybody's going to leave you alone if you don't get out right now and make things right with your servants. Wow. Joab, brave. He feels very close to King David. He sacrificed his life with King David for King David several times when King Saul was chasing King David through the wilderness of Judea. But he doesn't understand King David. He understands strategy. He understands war. He understands killing the enemy. He understands winning the battle, but he doesn't understand King David. So he commands King David, get up now and speak to comfort your servants. And I swear by the Lord that if you don't do that, we're all abandoning you. We're leaving you. And that'll be worse for you. I'm in verse 7. And that will be worse for you than all the evil that has befallen you before your youth until now. Then the king arose and sat at the gate, and they told all the people, saying, there is the king sitting at the gate. So all the people came before the king. They advertised the fact that King David got up off his mourning for his son Absalom, and he went to the gate of the city, which is the public forum in which the judges sit, the elders sit, and address the people. So the king listened to Joab. He did what Joab said, and he went to the gate to address the people. For every one of Israel had fled to his tents. In other words, when David left Jerusalem, many of the people went back to their homes. Many administrators went back to their homes, and they left Jerusalem. And now that the king is back at the gate, supposedly to address the people, to judge the people, they all come back. Now all the people were in dispute throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king saved us from the hand of our enemies. He delivered us from the hand of the Philistines, and now he had fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing back the king? Israel was a united kingdom. The 10 northern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, all the 12 tribes were united under King David. He conquered the Golan Heights. He approached the environs of Damascus. He beat the Philistines. He enlarged the land of Israel all the way to the Red Sea in the south and all the way to the Litani River in the north. A great warrior and a king. In fact, one of the only mentioned inscription of the house of David was found way up in what's called in the New Testament Caesarea of Philippi, way up at the foothills of Mount Hermon, the highest mountain in the Middle East. The house of David is mentioned archaeologically on the gates of the city of Dan. So the King David sent to Tzadok and Abiathar the priest, saying, speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to bring the king back to his house? Since the words of all Israel have come to the king, to this very house. You are my brethren. You are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you last to bring back the king? Something is going on. The people that saved David, that David appointed as spies in the house of Absalom, the priests, the two priests, Tzadok and Abiathar, kind of distanced themselves from David, according to this text, what I'm reading in between the lines. Because David bewailed and mourned for Absalom, who was a rebellious son, who according to the Torah should have been stoned and killed. And he ignored his servants, the ones that were faithful to him, that ran away with him, that paid the price to follow him. And they didn't appreciate it, which is normal. I mean, it's normal. I mean, that their feelings are understood. And David comes to them and says, hey, folks, why are you so slow? The king is back to his house. You are my brethren, you are bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king? He wants all of his former aides and supporters who paid a high price for standing with him even through the days of King Saul to come now around him, to surround him, to show their support for him. And it says, speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the word of all Israel has come to the king, to this very house? You are my brethren, you are bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. I expect from you, David says to them in these words, I expect you to be next to me, to show your support for me, not to abandon me. Don't be last, be there on my side. And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me and more also, if you are not a commander of the army before me continually in the place of Joab. David accepted Joab's reprimand. He accepted Joab's advice, but he didn't forgive him. And here we learn in this text that he is appointing Amasa in place of Joab without even telling Joab. He's making Amasa the chief of staff in verse 13. Is a master. David is a master, is a leader at the level of magician, that he gets the support of the people on his side, even though he has made some leadership mistakes in chapter 18. So he swayed the heart of all the men of Judah, just as the hearts of one man, so that they sent his word to the king, return, and all your servants. Then the king returned and came to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal, and to go to meet the king and escort the king across the Jordan. And Shimei, the son of Gerah, a Benjaminite, who was born in Bahurim, hurried and came down to the men of Judah to meet the King David. He's still in the Jordan when all this is happening, not in Jerusalem yet. So now there's a procession from the Transjordan, the other side of the Jordan, and people are gathered around him, and there is going to be a procession to bring the king back to Jerusalem. And Shimei, the son of Gerah, the Benjaminite, is organizing this procession. There was 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons, and his 20 servants with him. And they went over the Jordan before the king. Then the ferry boat went across to carry over the king's household and to do what he thought was good. David managed to regain the respect of the people in spite of his mistakes. He managed to regather his closest friends and advisors, including the two priests, Zadok and Aviatar. He managed to gather them on his side. That includes, of course, the Ark of the Covenant and the priesthood. And he's got Nathan the prophet with him. And they are now, again, a force to contend with. Now, Shimei, verse 18. Now they have a ferry boat. They carry him and his household across the Jordan River. Not that the Jordan River needs a ferry boat. Well, you could walk across. Actually, almost. A ferry for an old man like David and some of the other old men, they needed a ferry boat. Now Shimei the son of Gerah fell down before the king when he had crossed the Jordan. Then he said to the king, "Do not let my lord impute iniquity to me, or remember what wrong your servant did on the day." Remember, Shimei the son of Gerah cursed the king on the way out of Jerusalem, threw rocks at the king on the way out of Jerusalem. So now he's meeting King David and his entourage, the group that is bringing him back to Jerusalem, and essentially is confessing his sin and asking David, "Do not let my Lord impute iniquity to me, or remember what was wrong your servant did on the day that my Lord the king left Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart." Is asking for forgiveness. Verse 20, "For your servant know that I have sinned. Therefore here I am, the first to come today of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my Lord the king." Shimei, son of Gerah, is confessing his sin, is asking forgiveness. But Aviatar, the son of Tzruiah, the brother of Joab, Avishai, the son of Tzruiah, the brother of Joab, the son of Tzruiah, answered and said, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed one?" And David said, "What have I to do with you, sons of Tzruiah, that you should be adversaries to me today?" He already fired Joab, his old friend that stood by him all this time. Now his brother, because the sons of Tzruiah adversaries, enemies. "Shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For do I not know that today I am king over Israel?" Therefore the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king swore to him. He's not killing Joab. He's not killing Shimei, the son of Gerah, his enemy. He's not killing his other enemies that took side with Absalom. He's forgiving them magnanimously in public. But now there is the son of King Saul. Now Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, verse 24, came down to meet the king. And he had not cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he returned in peace. So it was when he had come to Jerusalem to meet the king that the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" You know, he was eating on the king's table. He was supported by the king. King David took the son of Saul right next to him to keep an eye on him, to watch him, to make sure that even though Mephibosheth was crippled, David wanted next to him to see what he's doing, to control him. So he's asking Mephibosheth, why didn't you go with me? And he answered, my lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame. And he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Therefore do what is good in your eyes. For all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore, what is right, I have still to cry out any more to the king. So the king said to Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, why do you speak any more of your matters? I have said, you and Ziba divide the land. Yeah. Then Mephibosheth said to the king, rather let him take it all, inasmuch as my lord the king has come back in peace to his own house. Mephibosheth is willing to give Ziba, his servant, his inheritance, because he's got nobody to inherit him anyway. The end of the line of King Saul, which Samuel the prophet had predicted. David's kindness to Barzillai. Barzillai the Gileadite from the Gilead. Remember the song, there is no balm in Gilead that makes the sensing soul free. And Barzillai the Gileadite came down from Regalim and went across the Jordan with the king to escort him across the Jordan. Now Barzillai was very aged man, 80 years old, and he had provided the king with supplies while he stayed in Machanaim, for he was a very rich man. And the king said to Barzillai, come across with me, and I will provide for you while you are with me in Jerusalem. But Barzillai said to the king, how long have I to live that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am today 80 years old. I can discern between the good and the bad. Can you, servant, taste what I eat or what I drink? Can I hear any longer the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be a further burden on my lord the king? In other words, Barzillai was already deaf and blind and old and sickly, and he didn't want to go with King David. He said, I'm too old for this. Your servant will go, verse 36, will go a little way across the Jordan with the king. And why should the king repay me with such reward? Please let your servant turn back again, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and my mother. But there is your servant Chinham. Let him cross over with my lord the king, and do for him what seems good to you. And the king answered, Chinham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him what seems good to you. Now whatever you request of me, I will do for you. Then all the people went over the Jordan, and the king had crossed over, and the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own place. Barzillai returned to his own place. Now the king, verse 40, now the king went to the Gilgal, and Chinham went with him, and all the people of Judah escorted the king, and also half of the people of Israel. Just then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king, his household, and all David's men with him across the Jordan. So all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is close relative to ours. Here we have a seed, verse 40 to verse 42, we have a seed of what is going to happen after Solomon's death. The enmity, the competition between the 10 northern tribes and Judah and Benjamin is sown right here in this chapter. Even before King Solomon becomes king. That spirit of competition started earlier, even in the days of Saul. King Saul, when he cut the calf to 12 parts and sent a part of the calf, the meat of the calf, to each tribe and said, if you don't join us and unite, you're going to be cut up like this calf to pieces. Mafia tactics, but works. So, the people from the 10 northern tribes are now coming and say, why did the Judeans not stand with you when Absalom started his rebellion in Hebron, in the heart, in the capital of Judah? And the king answered them. Verse 43. No, the people of Judah respond and say, because the king is a close relative of ours, he is from Judah. He's from us, not from you guys, not from the 10 northern tribes. He's from Judah. He's our relative. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we ever eaten at the king's expense? Or has he given us any gift? In other words, the king has not treated us anything special. He didn't feed us and he didn't take care of us. That's what it is. It is what it is. And you guys have no right to complain. Essentially, that's the answer that the people of Judah give to the 10 tribes of Israel. But the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 shares in the king. Therefore, we also have more right to David than you. You know, we are 10 and you guys are 2. Benjamin and Judah. We have 10 shares invested in King David. So we have more right than you guys. Don't think that because you're relative of the king and the king is from the tribe of Judah that you are now privileged. No, we are 10 shares, the 10 tribes. These are the seeds that grow into the division between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom in the days of David, still in the days of David, folks. This is so interesting. Things that happened years earlier sowed the seed that becomes destructive to the whole nation of Israel. The division of the 10 tribes, the enmity between Judah and the 10 tribes, the enmity between the house of Ahab and the house of Jehoshaphat in Judea, this thing that still is not resolved because the 10 tribes are not yet discovered and found and returned. These are the seeds, and it's important for us to see them, how the dynamics work here. The competition and the dislike. And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we are 10 shares in the king, therefore we have more right to David than you do. Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to advise bringing back our king? In other words, we advised to go across the Jordan and to bring back David to Jerusalem. We have as much share as you do, maybe more share because we're 10 tribes. The words of the men of Judah were fierce, and the words of the men of Israel, then the word of the men of Israel. In other words, the argument continued. And now I want to jump to, no, I'm going to stop here and come back in the next teaching on what happened to the man that David forgave. God bless you all. We'll continue this study. It's very, very interesting to me, and I hope it's interesting to you. You can learn about the character of David and the character of God that loved David. God bless all of you.